A small fire in the long winter, you wake to a world that has not yet decided to be day. The sky outside is the pale grey of frost-bitten linen, and the light that seeps into your cottage is thin, the kind that carries no warmth with it. The air has a bite, even here by the hearth, and your breath drifts upward in small clouds before dissolving into the rafters. The fire has burned low in the night. Only a few embers remain, huddled together under a crust of ash, their glow faint but stubborn. You reach for the poker. The iron is cold, almost painful to hold, and gently coax them back to life. A spark jumps, the tiniest leap of hope, and you lean close, blowing carefully, until the blackened wood begins to glow red again. Around you, the single room is still. The others are asleep under heavy blankets stitched from scraps of old clothes, the seams neat from hands that have mended them over and over. A pot hangs from the hearth hook, the scent of last night's thin broth still clinging to the air. Even now, the smell is a comfort, proof that there was warmth, that there was food, and that there will be again. Outside, the village is muffled under a deep layer of snow. The roofs sag gently beneath it. The well in the centre of the square is ringed with icicles. The air will sting your cheeks the moment you step out, but for now, you stay near the fire, holding your palms toward the warmth and listening to the soft crackle as the flames slowly catch. The winter has been long. Everyone in the village knows it. But no one says it outright. They simply work a little harder to stretch what remains in the storehouses. The sacks of rye and barley are lighter now, their contents eked out into loaves of dark bread that must last the week. The turnips and onions stored in the cool earth under the floor are beginning to soften, but they will still make a soup, especially if you add a pinch of dried herbs and a bone saved from the autumn slaughter. This is your work, the quiet labor that keeps the household alive. It is not celebrated. No one sings songs about a woman who knows exactly how many ladles of broth can be taken from the pot before it runs too thin. Yet without that knowledge, the winter would claim more than just the daylight hours. You step lightly across the worn boards, careful not to wake the children. In the corner, the bread lies wrapped in a cloth, yesterday's baking already hardening in the cold. You take a knife and cut thin slices, each one careful, almost measured against the next. A smear of dripping will soften it, and for the children, you will add a drizzle of honey, not enough to be lavish, but enough to remind them that sweetness exists. The fire is warmer now. You place the pot over it again, adding water from the jug and a handful of grains that have been kept in a small linen sack. They make a dull patter as they fall in, and you stir slowly, watching them swirl in the dark liquid. In an hour, it will be a broth not rich, but filling enough to carry the family through until the next meal. This routine is as much a part of winter as the snow itself. There is comfort in its familiarity, the same pot, the same slow simmer, the same way the steam curls in the air. Outside, the wind may change, the cold may deepen, but here at the hearth, there is a constancy that cannot be shaken. You know the others will wake soon. The youngest will come first, hair tangled from sleep, cheeks flushed from the warmth of the bed. They will shuffle toward the fire, drawn by its glow, and you will hand them a wooden cup with a little warm broth in it. They will drink without speaking, the steam fogging their lashes, and you will feel that quiet satisfaction that comes from seeing them safe and fed. There is more to do, of course. Always more. The woodpile must be checked. Each stick of seasoned oak or birch is counted in your mind, matched against the days you think are left until spring. The herbs hung above the hearth must be turned, to keep them from growing mold. The pot of rendered fat on the shelf must be covered again, so the mice do not find it. These small acts, each one barely worth noticing, are what stand between your family and the hard edge of hunger. You think of the women in the other cottages, each of them going through the same motions. In one house, a mother is setting bread to rise near her fire. In another, a grandmother is knitting woolen socks by the light of a single candle. Across the lane, a young wife is spooning broth into a bowl for her sick father-in-law. No one has to be told what to do. The rhythm of survival is built into the very bones of the village. You glance out the small window, its glass clouded with frost. Somewhere beyond the trees, the sun is struggling to climb into the sky, but here it is still winter dark. You can hear the faint creak of the ice on the river, the groan of branches under snow. And underneath it all, you hear the fire, the slow, steady breathing of the home. When the broth begins to bubble, you taste it. It is thin, but warm, and the grains have softened just enough to give it body. You add a pinch of dried sage, crumbling it between your fingers, the scent rising like a memory of summer fields. For a moment, you let yourself imagine green grass underfoot, the sound of bees, the heavy sweetness of ripe fruit. It will come again. You remind yourself. It always does. For now, the winter holds you close, and you hold your family closer. You keep the fire alive, not with great logs and roaring flames, but with careful tending, a little at a time. That is enough. Has always been enough. Winter and the emptying granary, the year's coldest weeks, always feel the longest. By now, the snow has settled into the shape of the land, smoothing the fields into white curves, hiding every furrow you once turned with the plough. The fences lean under its weight. The path to the granary is little more than a pale track pressed by careful boots. You know every step along that path, and each time you walk it, you hope the stores inside will look fuller than you remember. They never do. The granary itself is quiet, as though holding its breath. Inside, the air smells faintly of dry grain and old wood. The sacks are fewer now, their sides sagging. You lift one to test its weight, lighter than you'd like, heavier than it will be next month. Every handful you take from here is one you will not put back until the first harvest. It's a strange kind of arithmetic, the kind done in your head without pencil or slate. You measure not in numbers but in meals, a scoop of barley for today's stew, one loaf of bread for 2 days, a few roots to roast on the fire when the weather turns especially cruel. It is a game of trade-offs, and the rules are simple: keep everyone fed, and keep something left for tomorrow. The cold makes food stretch differently. In summer, a bowl of soup is light. In winter, it is everything. The body craves warmth, and every bite must work twice as hard to keep the cold from settling in the bones. You've learned tricks for that, adding more water to the pot so the steam lasts longer, seasoning with whatever herbs remain to fool the tongue into thinking the broth is richer than it is. Still, there are things you cannot fake. Flour, once gone, is gone. The same for salt. The same for oil. And so you walk the granary with a mental map, noting what can be spared, what must be guarded, and what will have to last until the thaw. You remember other winters, the bad ones. The year the harvest was half what it should have been, and the snow came early. The year the sickness passed through the village, and so many were too weak to work the fields. You remember how quickly the stores emptied then, how the sound of a hollow granary could make your stomach turn before you had even missed a meal. This year is not as bad, you tell yourself. The autumn had been generous enough, and the women of the village had worked quickly to dry apples, string beans, pickle cabbages. The shelves still hold jars of these, their colours muted, but still a reminder of the months when the sun was high. You run your fingers over the glass, feeling the slight stickiness of a seal that has wept a little brine. It is tempting to take one down, to open it now, but you wait. These are for when the cold is deepest, the nights longest. You close the granary door and turn the latch. The snow is bright outside, even under a sky the colour of pewter. Your boots sink into it as you walk back toward the cottage, the air so crisp it almost cracks when you breathe it in. Somewhere nearby, you hear the faint creak of a cart's wheel, the slow pace of an old mule. Neighbours making their own trip to check the stores, no doubt, their thoughts running along the same lines as yours. Back inside, you shake the snow from your cloak and hang it by the door. The fire has burned low again, but the pot is still warm to the touch. You take the barley you've brought and measure it into your hand before letting it fall into the broth. The grains hit the surface and sink, disappearing into the swirl. You stir, and the smell rises, earthy and familiar. The children will notice when the bread slices grow thinner, when the soup bowls hold more broth than barley. But for now, they still eat with trust, believing there will always be something to fill their stomachs. It is your job to make that belief true, at least until the first shoots of spring push through the thawing earth. In the evenings, when the shadows grow long, the talk around the fire often drifts toward the granary. Some speak of how much is left, others remember how much there used to be. The women, you notice, do not speak of it with fear. They speak of it as a puzzle to be solved, a rhythm to be kept. Grain, like the seasons, has its own measure, and if you learn it well, you can stretch it without breaking it. You think of the way the sacks settle over the winter, their sides folding inward as though sleeping. They are not empty yet, and as long as there is weight in them, there is a way forward. Some nights, when you cannot sleep, you picture the fields under all that snow. You imagine the seeds that still lie in the soil, hard and waiting. They too are counting the days until spring. The granary is not just a storehouse, it is a promise that the hunger of winter is temporary. And so you keep your quiet ledger, weighing each scoop, each loaf, each ladle against the days ahead. The numbers are not written anywhere but in your own mind, and they shift as the weather shifts, as the needs of the household change. A sick child means more broth, a neighbor in need means the bread must be cut thinner. It is not easy work, but it is steady work. And in the steady work, there is a kind of peace. By the time you finish stirring the pot, the smell has deepened. You taste it, letting the warmth spread through you, and you think of the granary again, the quiet building standing watch in the snow, holding just enough for just long enough. That will be your task until the thaw, to stretch that enough until it becomes plenty. The art of stretching food, there is a kind of quiet craft to making food last. It is not written down in any book, nor taught in any formal way, yet you learned it as a girl, watching the older women in your family work. A pinch here, a ladle there, the measured patience of stirring something thin until it feels like enough. Stretching food is more than just adding water. Anyone can do that. The art is in making the meal feel full, in convincing the body and the mind that there's been abundance when, in truth, there was only a little. It is in the layering of flavor, a sprig of dried thyme, a sliver of onion browned in the pan before the grains go in, a spoonful of yesterday's stew folded quietly into today's. You know the tricks well. Bread that has gone hard can be softened in broth or milk, becoming a pudding if there is a little honey left, or a savory dumpling if you fold it into a pot of stew. The hard ends of cheese, too dry to eat as they are, can be shaved into thin curls to melt into porridge, giving it richness. Even the water used to boil vegetables can become the base of the next day's soup, carrying with it the ghost of flavor. The hearth is your workshop. The pot is your canvas. You work with what you have, never what you wish you had, and in that constraint lies a kind of beauty. A handful of barley swells in the heat, a single carrot sliced thin can seem to appear in every spoonful. You understand how to make a meal look generous, even if the truth is measured in ounces. The children never notice the sleight of hand. They eat what is put before them with the easy trust of those who have never yet gone to bed truly hungry. You see them wiping the bowls clean with their bread, laughing at the steam curling from their cups, and you are glad for it. If they do not feel the shortage, then you have done your work well. Sometimes, when the cold is sharpest, you make a pot of broth early in the morning and let it sit by the edge of the fire all day. It will grow stronger as the hours pass, each ingredient giving itself slowly to the whole. By evening, it will be richer than it was at noon, and the smell will have filled the cottage, wrapping the family in the promise of warmth. Neighbors share their own ways. One woman swears by adding a few wild greens, even in winter, to brighten a pot of soup. Another keeps a jar of pickled beets, their sharpness cutting through the monotony of bread and grain. You trade these secrets as though they are treasure, because in their way, they are. It is not only about making the food last, it is about making the spirit last. A meal that feels thin can make the heart feel thin as well. But if the bread is warm and the broth fragrant, if there is a small treat tucked beside the plate, a pickled onion, a spoon of jam, then the day feels more bearable. You understand that food carries more than nourishment. It carries hope. In the evenings, you sometimes gather with other women to prepare meals together. Each brings what she can spare, a few potatoes, a pinch of spice, a strip of cured meat, and somehow, when it all goes into the pot, there is enough for everyone. It is an old magic, older than the village itself. Many hands, many hearts, one table. You recall one winter when the snow fell so heavily that the road to the next town was impassable for weeks. Supplies ran low, and it seemed the cupboards would empty before the thaw. But the women of the village met every day in the largest house, each contributing something small. One had flour, another eggs, another a jar of honey from the summer. Meals were shared, children were fed, and no one was left behind. The memory of that time is still warm in your mind, proof that scarcity can bring people closer. Stretching food also means thinking ahead. A joint of meat is roasted for the feast, but you set aside the bones for stock, the fat for frying, the scraps for tomorrow's pie. Nothing is wasted. Even the peels can be boiled for flavor. You have a quiet pride in knowing that your kitchen gives nothing back to the earth before it has been used in every way possible. It is slow work, and it requires attention. A pot left unwatched will boil away what little you have. The fire must be kept steady, the lid fitted tight, the stirring done at just the right moments. You listen for the sound of the simmer, low and even, the way a mother listens for the breathing of a sleeping child. Sometimes you think of how different the meals are in summer: fresh vegetables piled in baskets, berries eaten by the handful, bread baked without thought for how long it must last. Winter has its own taste, smoky, earthy, simple. It is not better or worse, only different, and it teaches you patience. When the meal is ready, you serve it in wooden bowls, each portion looking just as full as the next. The firelight makes the broth glow, and the scent of herbs rises with the steam. You sit with your family, taking the first spoonful with them, letting the warmth spread from your mouth to your fingertips. You've stretched the food again today, and tomorrow you will do it again. And in that repetition, there is safety. There is order. There is the knowledge that the harshness of winter can be met with quiet skill, that the table will not go empty as long as there is someone to tend the pot. Outside, the wind moves through the eaves, but inside, the bowls are warm and the conversation soft. You do not think of the granary now, or of how many sacks remain. You think only of this moment, this meal, and the comfort it brings. And perhaps when the last bowl is emptied, there will still be enough in the pot for tomorrow's lunch, richer for having rested overnight, flavoured with the patience of a winter's day. Duck bread and oat porridge, some foods are so simple that they hardly seem worth naming, yet they are the ones that hold a family together through the coldest months. In your cottage, those foods are dark bread and oat porridge. They do not draw praise, nor do they spark excitement the way a feast might, but they are steady, dependable, the kind of fare that warms the body without ceremony. The bread begins with flour from rye or barley, whichever the harvest gave most generously. White flour is a rare indulgence, saved for weddings or holy days. Dark flour is the everyday kind, dense and hearty, carrying the taste of the field in every slice. You have learned how it behaves in the bowl: heavier, slower to rise, but forgiving of long hours by the fire. The process begins the night before. You mix the flour with water and a pinch of salt, working it with your hands until the dough comes together. The texture is rough, almost coarse, and it clings to your fingers. You set it near the edge of the hearth to rise, covered with a cloth to keep in what little warmth there is. A morning, it will have swollen slightly, not in a great billowing cloud like fine wheat bread, but in a slow, patient way, the way winter itself moves. When the dough is ready, you shape it into a round, tucking the edges under to hold its form. The oven is not a separate place in this cottage, it is a space carved into the hearth, its floor of stone already holding the night's heat. You slide the loaf inside, the smell of flour and smoke mingling in the air. While the bread bakes, you turn to the porridge. Oats are a humble grain, but they are generous in what they give. They grow well in poor soil, and they keep for months if stored dry. A handful of oats in a pot of water swells into a meal that can feed the whole household, each spoonful carrying the warmth of the fire. Pour the oats into the pot, listening to the soft patter as they fall. The water soon clouds and thickens as the grains release their starch. You stir slowly, letting the rhythm of the spoon soothe you. The porridge needs time: too much heat, and it will scorch; too little, and it will remain hard. You find the middle ground, the steady simmer that coaxes it into creaminess. There are ways to make it more than just oats. Little milk, if there is any, will soften it further. A scrap of dried apple will bring a hint of sweetness. A sprinkle of salt will sharpen its flavour. On rare mornings, a drizzle of honey turns it into something the children call feast porridge, but even without these additions, it fills the belly and sets the day in motion. The bread is ready when the crust is dark and firm, the bottom giving a hollow sound when tapped. You take it from the oven and wrap it in a cloth, the steam escaping in fragrant curls. The first slice is always the best, the crumbs still warm, the crust giving way with a soft crackle. You cut it carefully, each piece the same width, enough for everyone, but never more than can be spared. Sometimes you serve the bread and porridge together. A slice of bread dipped into the warm oats carries both textures at once: the chew of the crust, the softness of the grain. It is not fine dining, but it is the taste of survival, and there is comfort in knowing it will be here again tomorrow. You think of the fields where the rye and oats grew, the way they bent under the weight of summer rain. Those fields seem far away now, buried under snow, yet their work continues here in your kitchen. The grains that once swayed in the wind now sit quietly in your hands, transformed into something that sustains life. The children eat quickly, their breath puffing over their bowls. They do not notice the way you take the crust for yourself, leaving the softer pieces for them. They do not see you slip the smallest slice of bread into a cloth to save for later, in case someone comes to the door in need. These are not things you speak of, they are simply what is done. When the meal is finished, you wrap what remains. The bread will last for days if kept dry, though it will harden. The porridge will thicken as it cools, but a splash of water and a stir will bring it back to life. Nothing is wasted, not the crumbs on the board, not the film at the bottom of the pot. Dark bread and oat porridge may not be the foods people remember in songs or stories, but in your own quiet way, you know they deserve a place there. They are the steady drumbeat under the melody of winter, the background that makes survival possible. Without them, the table would be emptier, the days longer, the cold sharper. And so you keep making them, day after day, with the same patience you give to tending the fire. You know that when the snow melts and the fields green again, the bread and porridge will still have their place, not because they are luxurious, but because they are true. Women's network of mutual aid in the quiet rhythm of village life. Survival is never a solitary act. You may tend your own hearth, knead your own bread, and stir your own pot, but there is a thread, invisible yet strong, that connects you to the other women scattered across the snow-covered lanes. It is this thread that weaves the true safety net, one not found in the granary or the fields, but in the steady hands and watchful eyes of your neighbours. It begins with small gestures, a knock at the door when someone has baked more bread than they can eat before it goes stale, a folded cloth holding a wedge of cheese left on a windowsill when you are out, a handful of dried beans slipped into your apron pocket after you mention that your jar is almost empty. There is no ledger, no score to be settled. Each gift is given with the unspoken understanding that someday, perhaps soon, the path of kindness will run in the other direction. In cold months, this web of quiet exchange becomes a lifeline. You know whose cow still gives milk, whose cellar still holds apples, whose hen has surprised everyone with an early clutch of eggs. These bits of knowledge are not gossip, they are the map by which the village moves through winter. And you play your part in it. When your bread comes from the oven, you cut a slice and wrap it for the widow 2 cottages away, whose hands have grown too stiff to knead her own dough. When the pot on your fire holds more soup than your family will finish, you carry a wooden bowl across the lane to the young mother whose husband has been away working in the next town. You do these things without ceremony, without announcement, because in this season, generosity is as ordinary as breathing. The help runs deeper than food. There are children to mind when a mother must walk to the far end of the village for water. There is wood to stack for the old man who lives alone, his back too bent to lift the heavier logs. There are clothes to be mended, stitches passed from one set of hands to another while stories flow as easily as the thread through the fabric. You have your own memories of being on the receiving end. One winter, when your youngest was sick and you barely left the cottage for a week, it was your neighbours who kept your firewood stacked high and your pantry from emptying. A loaf of bread appeared each morning on the bench outside your door. A jar of broth arrived in the hands of a child with a shy smile. You had not asked, but they had noticed. And that noticing, you think, is as important as the giving itself. In the evenings, when the light fades early and the work of the day is done, you sometimes gather in the largest kitchen in the village. A few women bring knitting, others bring mending, and someone always brings a pot to set over the fire. Laughter comes easily here, even in the coldest weeks. You trade recipes, share remedies for winter coughs, and swap news of distant relatives. These gatherings are not planned in any formal way. They happen because someone has an extra loaf or a bit of time, and the rest simply follow. Children grow up in the center of this network. They learn that food is not just what is on their own plate, but what can be shared from it. They see how quickly a basket of eggs can change hands, how a scarf knitted in one home can end up keeping a child warm in another. By the time they are old enough to work the fields or tend the hearth themselves, the rhythm of giving and receiving is second nature. You sometimes think about how fragile life would be without this web. A single family alone could not endure the leanest years, not when illness takes the strongest worker, or a storm ruins the stored grain, or the frost lingers too long into spring. But together, the village can absorb these blows. One person's surplus covers another's shortage, and so the balance holds. There is a kind of unspoken honor in keeping this balance. You not give so much that your own family goes without, but you give enough that no one feels the sting of scarcity alone. And when you receive, you accept it with the same grace, knowing that the act of taking is just another part of the circle. Tonight, you have set aside a loaf for the midwife. Her work keeps her out late, walking the dark lanes to sit at the bedside of mothers and newborns. You know that when she comes home cold and tired, this bread will be waiting for her on her table, and she will understand that it is more than bread, it is recognition, gratitude, and care. The snow outside is falling steadily now, muting the world beyond your door. Inside, the hearth glows, the pot simmers, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of knowing that you are not alone in this winter. Beyond the walls of your cottage, there are other fires burning, other hands working, other hearts watching out for yours. In this way, the women of the village keep more than their families alive. They keep the whole village alive, bound together, not by law or coin, but by the unshakable knowledge that survival is something you do together. And when the thaw finally comes, when the fields open their arms to the plough and the first shoots of green break through the soil, it will be because these invisible threads held firm through every storm. Saving every drop of oil and fat in winter, every resource has its own kind of weight, but none feels quite as precious as oil and fat. Grain can be stretched, roots can be stored, but once the last drop of oil is gone, there is no way to coax it back until the world turns green again. You know this as well as you know the sound of your own hearth. The jar on the highest shelf holds what remains of the autumn's renderings, pale, solid fat from the slaughtered animals, stored carefully in earthenware so the cold will keep it firm. Beside it sits a smaller jug of oil, pressed from seeds and saved for the rare dishes that demand its particular smoothness. These are not for everyday use. These are for when the need is real. You have learned the quiet skill of using them sparingly. A smear of fat on the hot stone can keep bread from sticking. A drop of oil stirred into soup at the very end can give the illusion of richness, the way sunlight can trick the eye into thinking it is warmer than it truly is. You know the line between frugality and mereness, enough to nourish, never enough to waste. Each time you lift the jar's lid, you take a moment to breathe in the faint scent, something between comfort and memory. It recalls the autumn day when the work of butchering filled the yard with voices, when the air was sharp with cold and the table was heavy with meat that would not last fresh but would, in other forms, see you through the months ahead. That day's labour is stored here in this jar, waiting to be spent in careful increments. Even the scraps have value. The browned crust from the bottom of the roasting pan can be scraped and saved, melted into porridge for a hint of flavour. The trimmings from cured meat can be rendered into dripping, poured through cloth, and set aside for frying. Nothing is thrown away without first asking, "Can this give us one more meal?" The children see you collecting these scraps and think little of it now. But someday, they will remember the way you held the spoon at an angle to pour only what was needed, or the way you wiped every last bit from the pan with a crust of bread so that nothing was left behind. These habits will become theirs, as natural as breathing. Neighbours share in this watchfulness. You know whose stores are running low, whose oil jug grows lighter with each week. Quiet exchanges happen, a small pot of dripping traded for a bag of dried peas, a ladle of soup offered in thanks for a spoonful of fat that turned it from thin to hearty. There is no shame in this. It is the understanding of the season. No one hoards without cause, and no one asks without giving in return. There are moments when you allow yourself a small generosity. The cake baked for a named day, brushed with oil so it shines in the candlelight. A slice of bread toasted with a bit of dripping for the children on a morning when the frost has painted every window white. These little luxuries are not only for the body, they are for the spirit, a reminder that life in winter is not only about enduring, but about finding small joys worth holding on to. By evening, the jar is returned to its place on the shelf, its lid fitted tight. You never leave it open for long. The cold air keeps it firm, but you keep the mice away with care. The jug of oil is wrapped in cloth, the better to keep the light from touching it, because even the sun can spoil what must last. You think about the seasons when these jars are full, the height of summer, when seeds are pressed and the golden liquid runs clear into the waiting pots, the autumn butchering days, when every part of the animal is given a purpose. Those seasons feel far away now, separated from you by months of frost and snow. But you keep them in mind, because each careful spoonful taken today is a promise to meet those seasons again. When you cook with fat or oil, the scent changes the whole room. Even the thinnest broth feels more generous when it carries that soft richness, clinging to the wooden spoon as you stir. Bread takes on a deeper colour, and porridge seems smoother, more comforting. It is a transformation you have learned to savour, knowing how rarely you can afford it. Sometimes, when you are alone in the kitchen and the night is quiet, you take out the jar and simply look at it, the pale surface smooth and even, the mark of the last spoonful still faintly visible. It is not greed that makes you guard it so carefully. It is respect for the work, the season, and the countless hands that made it possible. Imagine the days ahead, measuring in your mind how long the stores will last. A spoonful for Sunday bread, another for the feast day next month, the rest divided into quiet, ordinary meals that will need a little extra strength. This is not guesswork. It is a kind of math that lives in your hands and your eyes, learned over many winters. As the fire settles for the night, you place the jar and jug side by side on the shelf, their weight reassuring in its familiarity. You know that by guarding them, you are guarding more than food. You are holding on to the memory of seasons past and the certainty of seasons yet to come, a link in the unbroken chain that carries your family through the harshest times. Herbs and health in the deep of winter. When the wind bites and the snow lies heavy, health feels as fragile as the flame of a candle. Illness can slip into a home quietly, carried on a cough or a chill in the bones, and once inside, it is not eager to leave. Without doctors nearby, without medicine beyond what the land itself provides, you turn to the one store that does not sit in the granary or the pantry, the bundles of herbs hanging above the hearth. The shapes are familiar, the feathery sprigs of dill, the broad leaves of sage, the tiny flowers of chamomile, all dried to a muted shade of their summer selves. Each bundle tells a story of warmer months, of hands gathering them in baskets, of sunlight pressing its warmth into the leaves, of careful tying and hanging in the kitchen where the smoke from the fire could keep them dry. These herbs are more than flavor. They are your medicine chest, your comfort, your quiet defense against the season's ills. A pinch of thyme in a pot of broth does more than season it. It warms the chest, soothes the breath. Sage, steeped in hot water, can ease a sore throat. Chamomile, brewed into a gentle tea, can lull a restless child into sleep. When someone in your household begins to cough, you reach for the elderberries stored in a jar on the shelf. Boiled gently with honey, they make a syrup dark as ink, a spoonful taken in the morning and again at night. The taste is sharp but sweet, and the children accept it without protest, knowing it comes with your watchful care. In the coldest months, you make a tisane of mint and lemon balm, the steam carrying a brightness into the dim corners of the room. The scent alone can lift a mood, reminding you of green leaves underfoot and the hum of bees. You believe that healing begins in the senses, in the warmth of the cup in your hands, in the aroma that softens the air. Some remedies are as much ritual as they are treatment. A sickbed is prepared with warmed bricks wrapped in cloth to keep the feet comfortable. The pillow is sprinkled with lavender to quiet the mind. The patient is given sips of warm broth infused with garlic, both for its strength and for the comfort of its familiar taste. You sit beside them, knitting or mending, the rhythm of your hands as steady as your presence. You do not think of these acts as extraordinary. They are simply what women in your family have always done, passing down the knowledge of which plant soothes which ailment, of how long to steep a tea, of when to let a remedy rest and when to stir it again. The language of herbs is as much a part of your life as the language of bread or firewood. Even in scarcity, you try to keep the herb stores varied. In autumn, you dry nettles for their strength, rose hips for their sharp sweetness and their gift of keeping colds away. You save the roots of dandelion, scrubbed and dried, to be brewed into a bitter drink that stirs the appetite. Each one is a little piece of the sunlit months, hidden away until needed. Neighbors come to you sometimes, asking for a pinch of something they do not have. You give it freely, because you know they would do the same. In return, they might bring you a strip of cloth, a measure of flour, or simply their thanks. The herbs, after all, do not thrive because they are hoarded, they thrive because they are used. There are times, too, when you use herbs not for the body, but for the mind. A bundle of rosemary hung near the door to clear the air, a sprig of juniper in the fire to drive away the damp chill. The scent changes the way the home feels, making it less like a fortress against the cold and more like a refuge within it. You think often of the women who taught you these ways, your mother, your grandmother, the midwife who lived 3 houses down. You remember watching their hands as they measured and mixed, the quiet certainty in their movements. You remember the way they spoke to the plants as they gathered them, as though the act of asking politely might make the harvest better. When spring comes again, the herb shelf will grow fuller, but for now, you measure each handful with care. A little for the soup tonight, a little for the tea tomorrow, and always enough left to meet the next illness with readiness. This is not just about treating sickness. It is about keeping the household's strength whole through the long stretch of winter. The fire snaps softly behind you as you hang a fresh cloth bag of dried peppermint beside the others. Its green has dulled in colour, but the scent is as strong as the day you picked it. In the quiet of the kitchen, it feels almost like a promise that no matter how fierce the winter outside, there will always be some green left within these walls. Little rituals by the hearth in the heart of winter. When days are short and nights seem endless, the hearth is more than a place for cooking, it is the pulse of the home. Its glow draws everyone in, not just for heat, but for comfort, for company, and for the small rituals that keep the spirit as alive as the body. You tend the fire first thing each morning, coaxing embers into flame, not in haste, but in patience. There is a rhythm to it. Shake the ash free, lay the kindling just so, feed it with a split log until the crackle deepens into a steady burn. The others in the house know the sound and the smell. They can tell from their beds when the day has begun because the hearth is awake. Around it, the family gathers, and here the smallest gestures become traditions. A cup of warm broth passed into waiting hands. It held briefly over the fire until the crust softens and the steam rises again from within. Someone always hums, maybe without realizing it, the same tune that has been in the family for as long as you can remember. The hearth is also where stories are told. Not the grand tales of kings or battles, but the smaller stories that belong to your own people, the time the goat escaped and had to be coaxed down from the granary roof, the winter when the snow came so deep the door would not open until it was shoveled from the inside. The children listen wide-eyed, their cheeks flushed from the heat, and you see how the warmth of the fire seeps into the warmth of their laughter. On evenings when the work is done early, there is time for quiet crafts here. You mend socks by firelight, the needle flashing in and out of wool with steady precision. The children plait rushes into mats, their fingers moving more surely with each one. Someone shells the last of the dried peas into a wooden bowl, the small thuds marking the slow passage of time. Sometimes you brew tea just for the pleasure of it, not because anyone is sick or weary, but because the scent of chamomile or mint rising in the steam makes the room feel gentler. You pour it into mismatched cups, each one warming the hands that hold it, and for a while, the only sound is the fire's low hum. There are rituals for the seasons too, even in winter. A candle is lit on certain nights, its flame joining the fire's glow, marking a name day or the anniversary of a wedding. On these evenings, the bread is cut a little thicker, and perhaps a song is sung softly, so as not to wake the smallest ones asleep on the bench. You notice how these little acts give the days shape. Without them, winter might feel like one long stretch of grey, but with them, each day has its own small anchor. They are not extravagant things, a log placed in the fire with a wish for good health, a coin tucked under the bread board for luck, a pinch of salt cast into the flames to ward off misfortune. They cost nothing but intention, and yet, they make the home feel rich. Neighbours, too, bring their own customs when they visit. One might toss a sprig of rosemary into the hearth for remembrance. Another might stir the pot 3 times clockwise before taking their share, for luck in the door, as she says. These habits mingle in the air like the scents of wood smoke and herbs, blending into the shared fabric of village life. Children carry these rituals without knowing their age. They copy the way you pat the bread before sliding it into the oven, or how you tap the edge of the hearthstone twice before sitting. Years from now, they will repeat these motions in their own homes, perhaps without remembering where they learned them, but the memory will live in their hands. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, you wake and find the fire as dim to embers. You rise quietly, lay on another log, and watch as the flame takes hold again. In that moment, with the house silent and everyone sleeping, it feels like a private ceremony, you and the fire keeping watch over all the rest. You have come to understand that survival in winter is not only about the bread on the table or the wood in the stack. It is also about the warmth that comes from these small, repeated acts, each one a reminder that life continues, even here in the quiet cold. And as long as the hearth burns, you know there will be a place for those rituals to live. The coldest day of the winter it begins before dawn, with a silence so deep it feels heavy. Even the wind, so often restless in winter, has stilled. When you step to the door, the air stings your face like the edge of a blade. The snow, which has been soft for weeks, is now crusted and sharp underfoot, each step crunching loudly in the quiet. You know, before you even glance at the sky, that this will be the coldest day of the year. The light is strange, almost brittle. The sun has not yet risen, but the world is bright with the reflection of moonlight on snow, every drift glittering as though scattered with frost-born stars. Your breath escapes in clouds so thick they linger, curling around your scarf before breaking apart in the frozen air. The village moves slowly this morning. Smoke rises from chimneys later than usual, as families delay the moment of leaving their beds. The first to venture out are the ones with animals to tend, figures hunched against the cold, carrying buckets that steam faintly in the half-light. You hear the dull clang of a pail set down too quickly, the sound startling in the stillness. Inside your cottage, the fire is already working harder than it should have to. You feed it the thickest logs you have, knowing they will burn down faster in the deep cold. The heat barely pushes back the chill that seeps through the walls, but it is enough to keep the frost from forming on the inside of the window panes. Meals on a day like this are chosen not for taste, but for their ability to keep warmth in the body. You set a pot of porridge over the fire, stirring in dried apples for sweetness and a pinch of salt to sharpen the flavor. The steam feels almost medicinal as it rises to your face. By midday, the cold has deepened further. The snow outside squeaks underfoot, a sound only the coldest days produce. Water freezes in the bucket within minutes of being drawn, and even the hens in their coop have gone quiet, their feathers puffed against the cold. You bring them extra straw, your fingers numbing despite your gloves, and linger only as long as necessary. This is the kind of cold that tests the village's patience. Doors stay shut, shutters closed tight, and the paths between houses grow quiet. The children, usually eager to tumble in the snow, sit close to the fire instead, bundled so thickly they can hardly bend their elbows. You give them small tasks, peeling carrots for supper, winding yarn into balls to keep their hands busy and their minds from dwelling on the cold. By late afternoon, a few neighbors make their way to the communal hall, a large room with a hearth big enough to warm a crowd. You join them, carrying a covered pot of barley stew to add to the shared meal. The air inside is warmer, filled with the mingled scents of bread, broth, and smoke. People shed their outer layers and gather close, speaking in low voices, the conversation flowing easily despite the frost still clinging to their hair. Someone plays a tune on a fiddle, the notes bright and quick, as though to shake off the cold. The children huddle together on benches, sipping warm broth from mugs, their cheeks pink. The older ones trade stories of winters past, the year the snowdrifts covered the fences, the time when the river froze so solid a cart could cross it. Each tale seems to end with a small laugh, as though to remind everyone that the cold, no matter how fierce, is something the village has faced before. When the meal is done, people linger longer than usual, reluctant to step back into the night. But eventually, the fire in the hall must be banked, and everyone pulls on their coats and scarves, bracing for the walk home. The air outside is even sharper now, the stars above blazing in the clear, frozen sky. Back at your own hearth, you set another log on the fire and wrap the children in blankets. Supper has left everyone drowsy, and soon the room is filled with the quiet sound of steady breathing. You sit for a while, watching the flames, feeling the cold pressing against the walls but unable to breach the circle of warmth inside. It will not last forever, you remind yourself. By morning, the worst of it will have passed, the air softening slightly, the frost loosening its grip on the world. But tonight, in this coldest of nights, you take comfort in the knowledge that every home in the village is holding its own small flame against the dark. A special meal for a winter feast even in the leanest years, the calendar has its bright spots. There are days the village will not let pass quietly, feast days, name days, the turn of the year, and on those days, the table must hold something more than the everyday bread and broth. It is not simply about food, it is about marking the passage of time, reminding everyone that even in winter, there are reasons to gather and celebrate. The decision to make a special meal begins days in advance. You check the stores, weighing the cost of using what could be stretched into many plain meals for the sake of one generous one. The answer, most years, is yes. The winter is long, and the people must be reminded that it is not all endurance. For this feast, you bring out the small sack of finer flour, saved for such moments. You will use it to bake honey cakes modest in size, but rich in scent and taste. Honey, gathered in the summer and stored carefully away, is as golden and thick as it was on the day it was taken from the comb. You warm it gently by the fire so it will fold easily into the batter. The smell fills the kitchen, carrying with it a promise of sweetness that feels like sunlight in winter. The main pot will be thicker than usual, a stew made with the best of what remains: chunks of root vegetables, a handful of dried peas, and from the small parcel wrapped in cloth, a piece of smoked meat. You cut it carefully, each slice meant to flavor the whole pot rather than serve as a portion by itself. As it simmers, the broth takes on a deep, savory fragrance, the kind that draws people to the table before you've even called them. Neighbors contribute what they can. One brings a jug of cider, cloudy and sharp. Another offers a small wheel of cheese, its rind dry but its heart creamy and mild. A jar of pickled cabbage appears, its brine bright enough to cut through the richness of the stew. Each gift adds not only to the table, but to the feeling of shared abundance. The feast is held in the communal hall, where the hearth is wide enough to hold 3 pots side by side. The air is warm with the mingling scents of bread, meat, and spice. Candles are set along the tables, their light flickering on the faces of those who have not seen the sun in weeks. The children dart between benches, their laughter mixing with the low hum of conversation. When the food is served, there is no rush. Each person receives a ladle of stew, a slice of bread, a wedge of cheese. The honey cakes are saved for last, carried to the table still warm, their tops glistening. Even the smallest portion is savoured, bites taken slowly, as though stretching the taste itself. After the meal, someone brings out a fiddle, another a drum. The music begins softly, but soon the rhythm takes hold, and feet tap under the tables. There is clapping, and then singing old songs everyone knows, the kind that carry easily in the warm air and seem to stitch the crowd together. You notice the way the older villagers sit a little straighter tonight, the way their eyes follow the children playing at the edges of the room. You see how the young ones listen more closely to the stories told by their elders, as if sensing that these moments are worth remembering. Night runs later than usual, the cold outside forgotten for a while. When it is time to leave, people step into the snow with full bellies and warmer hearts. The glow from the hall spills into the street, lighting the path home. Back in your own cottage, the fire is still alive. You hang your cloak to dry, the scent of the feast still clinging to the fabric. There will be no stew left for tomorrow. The pot was scraped clean, but that is as it should be. The feast is meant to be eaten fully, the memory of it carried forward to feed the days ahead. As you bank the fire for the night, you think of how the taste of honey and the sound of song will linger in everyone's minds. It is not the kind of nourishment you can store on a shelf, but it is just as vital a reminder that winter can hold joy, not only hardship. And when the next special day arrives, you will find a way to fill the table again. Teaching the children to keep the hearth may be the center of the home, but it does not keep itself. Someone must know how to coax a stubborn ember into flame, how to keep a pot from boiling over, how to judge the right moment to add grain to broth. These are not skills learned in a day. They are taught slowly, in small lessons, passed from hand to hand like a precious tool. You begin with the oldest child, showing them how to lay kindling in a crisscross pattern so the air can move freely. You place the smallest sticks first, then the thicker ones, explaining that fire, like people, grows better with a gentle start. Their small hands fumble at first, but soon they find the rhythm, and you watch with quiet pride as a spark catches and blooms into steady flame. Next comes the care of the pot. You teach them to stir from the bottom, lifting gently so nothing sticks. They learn to add water when the broth sinks too low, to listen for the change in sound that means the grains are softening. You explain how certain herbs should be added early, others just before serving, not only for taste, but so their healing properties remain. Bread making is a longer lesson. You let them feel the difference between a dough that has been kneaded enough and one that still needs work. You show them how to dust the board lightly so the flour doesn't waste, and how to cover the dough to keep it from drying while it rests. On baking days, they stand close by the hearth, peering into the oven's dark mouth to watch the loaf rise. It is not only the cooking they must learn, but the keeping of supplies. You teach them to hang herbs high, away from damp, to wrap bread in cloth, not leave it uncovered, to always seal the jars and return them to their shelf. These habits are as important as the recipes themselves, for without them, the work of gathering and storing would be wasted. Sometimes, you teach without words. The child notices you breaking your own bread crust smaller so there will be enough for another at the table. They see you setting aside a jar for a neighbor without being asked. These lessons are not spoken, but they take root just as firmly. On stormy days, when the snow piles high against the door, the children practice making feast porridge, oats stirred with the last scrapings of honey or a pinch of dried fruit. They learn that even a simple meal can feel special when made with care. You tell them, a full belly is good, but a full heart is better, and though they giggle at the words, they remember them. There are safety lessons too. Never leave the hearth without banking the fire. Never stir the pot without using the long-handled spoon. Never lean too far over the flames. These rules are repeated often, not to frighten, but to give them the knowledge that will keep them safe when they are the ones tending the fire alone. As the winter weeks pass, you notice the children's confidence growing. The eldest can keep the fire alive through the night without supervision. The younger ones can measure out the barley for the day's stew without spilling a grain. Even the smallest can carry a basket of kindling or fetch water from the jug. Sometimes, you let them take charge entirely. You sit back, mending by the fire, while they build the morning flame and set the pot to boil. There are mistakes: a pot too full, a loaf left in the oven a little long, but the learning is in the doing. You offer guidance when needed, but mostly you let the work speak for itself. You know these skills will follow them beyond your own walls. One day, they will keep their own hearths, in cottages not yet built, with families not yet born. They will pass the same lessons on, adding their own touches, perhaps their own recipes. Somewhere, years from now, they may find themselves stirring a pot on a winter's morning and thinking of these days, of your voice explaining how to keep the heat steady and the soup from sticking. Teaching them to keep the hearth is more than teaching them to cook. It is giving them the means to care for themselves and for others. It is showing them that warmth and nourishment are things that can be made with patience, even when the world outside is cold and scarce. When the evening comes and the fire burns bright, you watch them moving about the kitchen, each with a task in hand. The bread rests under its cloth, the pot simmers, the herbs hang overhead. The air smells of wood smoke and sage. And you think, yes, they are ready, and the hearth will never go cold in their keeping. Resting by the hearth, evening settles early in winter, the light fading long before the day's work feels done. Outside, the snow reflects what little glow remains in the sky, but inside, it is the hearth that rules the light. The fire burns low now, steady rather than fierce, casting a warm amber that softens the edges of the room. This is the time of day when the house exhales. The pots have been cleaned and set aside, the bread wrapped for tomorrow, the water jug refilled. The children, no longer darting from one task to another, sit curled in blankets on the benches that flank the hearth. Their cheeks are warm, their eyes heavy. You take your seat in the old chair by the fire, the one worn smooth at the arms from years of use. The heat reaches your bones slowly, easing the ache in your shoulders from a day spent lifting, stirring, carrying. Your hands rest for the first time since morning, fingers still faintly scented with whatever herbs you touched last. The room is quiet, but not silent. The fire hums in its low way, logs settling with a soft sigh as they burn. Someone shifts under their blanket. The old clock ticks steadily in the corner, marking each second like a heartbeat. Outside, you can hear the muffled world, the faint creak of a tree in the wind, the distant bark of a dog. All of it feels far away. Resting by the hearth is not simply stopping, it is a ritual in itself. You pull a small basket of mending into your lap, not because the work must be done tonight, but because the familiar motion is part of the comfort. The needle rises and falls in the dim light, catching a glint of fire now and then. The children watch, half dreaming, and you know they are not just seeing stitches, they are seeing the patience it takes to make small things last. Sometimes, someone will speak. A question about tomorrow's weather, a memory of a summer day, the beginning of a story they've heard a dozen times before but want to hear again. You answer slowly, letting your voice match the pace of the evening. There's no need to rush, the night will carry the rest of the hours without your help. On the best nights, the air smells faintly sweet, either from a bit of wood sap in the logs, or from the cup of tea you've brewed just for sitting. Chamomile, perhaps, or mint, steeped long enough that the scent rises with every sip. The cup warms your palms, the steam curls toward your face, and for a moment you close your eyes, letting the heat sink into you. The younger children often drift to sleep here, their heads leaning against each other or against your arm. You let them stay until the fire is ready to be banked for the night, knowing these are the moments that will live in their memories: the soft light, the steady warmth, the low murmur of voices, the sense of safety so complete it can carry them into dreams. Now and then, a neighbor might drop in, drawn by the light they see through your small window. They sit for a while, warming their hands, sharing a bit of news or a quiet joke. No one stays long, the walk home in the cold is never easy. But their presence reminds you that even in stillness, you are part of a larger circle. As the hour grows late, the fire burns lower still. You set aside the mending, fold the blankets over the sleeping children, and add one last log to carry the heat into the first part of the night. Then you bank the embers carefully. tucking them under ash so they will hold their glow until morning. Before you leave the hearth, you pause for a moment, simply looking at it the way the last light of the flames paints the walls gold, the way the air closest to it still shimmers with warmth. It feels like the heart of the house, and in a way, it is. Without it, winter would be harder, the nights longer. When you finally step away, the warmth follows you, lingering in your hands, your face, even in your thoughts. The rest of the house is dark and cool, but you carry the hearth's comfort with you, a reminder that tomorrow, when the first light comes, you will return to tend it again. Quiet acts of courage in winter does not often look like the stories tell it. There are no banners waving, no shouts of victory, no grand speeches. Here, courage is smaller, quieter, almost invisible, but no less vital. It is the courage to give away the last crust of bread when someone else needs it more. The courage to face a day when the stores are thin and still speak to the children in a calm, steady voice. The courage to keep the fire burning when the wind seems determined to snatch it away. Most of these moments pass without notice, even by the ones whose lives they preserve. No one applauds when you decide to cut your own portion in half so that there will be enough for everyone at the table. No one calls you a hero when you stay up through the night with a sick child, holding their hand until the fever breaks. Yet these are the decisions that tip the balance between getting through the season and being overcome by it. Sometimes courage means refusing to panic when the weather turns cruel. You have seen storms before. You have learned that worry only wastes the energy needed for work. On days when the cold bites deep, you still take the time to heat water for washing hands before a meal, because cleanliness is a quiet shield against sickness. You still hang herbs to dry by the fire, knowing their use will come in the weeks ahead. Other times, courage is in the act of sharing. The neighbor's cow has stopped giving milk. You pass them a jar of broth. The widow's roof leaks. You send your eldest with a basket of candling and a loaf of bread. You do it without ceremony, because there is no need for thanks. The gift is simply the way the village survives together. There's courage, too, in holding to traditions even when they seem impractical. Lighting a candle on a feast day when oil is scarce. Setting the table with the best cloth you own, even if it means it will need washing in icy water the next day. Singing the same winter song your grandmother sang to you, though your voice is hoarse from the cold. These things remind everyone, yourself included, that life is more than survival. It is shape and meaning and beauty, even here. Some of the hardest choices you make are the ones no one else knows about. You might notice the last sack of grain is lower than expected. Instead of telling the family and spreading worry, you quietly adjust the portions. You stretch the soup a little more, serve bread a little thinner, so that by the time anyone notices, the spring shoots will already be breaking through the thawing earth. Courage can also mean letting go. The hen that no longer lays eggs is taken for the pot, though she has been part of the yard for years. The piece of cloth you've saved for a new dress becomes patches for a child's torn trousers instead. These decisions are not easy, but you make them, because they keep the family warm, fed, and whole. You remember winters from your own childhood, when you watched your mother make such choices. She never explained them in words, but you learned them all the same. The way she always set aside the choicest bite for the smallest child. The way she greeted visitors with something warm to drink, even if it meant less for the household later. Back then, you did not think of these as acts of bravery. Now you know better. The children may not yet understand the quiet weight of the decisions you make, but they feel the effects. They feel the security of a home that is warm, a table that holds food every day, a parent whose voice stays steady even when the cold outside grows sharp. And someday, they will carry these same patterns into their own homes, repeating the same silent acts of courage without needing to name them. At night, when the fire is banked and the house is still, you sometimes think about all the other homes in the village, each with its own small dramas and private acts of bravery. A mother keeping the last apple hidden for a sick child. A grandmother giving up her portion of meat so the younger ones can have it. These moments do not make their way into history books, but they are what keep history moving forward at all. In the morning, there will be more choices to make. The cold will not soften because of yesterday's kindness, and the stores will not refill themselves. But you will rise, tend the fire, measure the flour, stir the pot, and keep going. Not because it is easy, but because it is necessary, and because in the end, that is what courage has always been. Spring's first signs, it happens so quietly you almost miss it. After months of white and grey, the first change is a sound, the steady drip of water from the eaves. At first you think it's only a trick of the day's mildness, but then you see the icicles, once sharp and solid, growing thin and hollow, their points dark with melting. The air is still cold, but not in the same way. There is a softness to it, a hint that it no longer wishes to bite. On your morning walk to the granary, your boots sink less into snow and more into a slush that yields underfoot. The path, so long bordered by high drifts, is now edged with dark patches where the earth is beginning to show through. They are small and ragged, but they smell of something rich and alive, the deep scent of soil waking from its long sleep. The trees still stand bare, but their branches hold a different kind of weight now. You notice the tiniest buds forming, almost invisible unless you lean close. They're tight and closed, but they promise green, and the sight of them sets something stirring in you as well. Inside the cottage, the hearth still burns, but you find yourself opening the door for a little while each day to let in the fresh air. It carries with it a scent you had forgotten over the winter, faint, almost shy, but unmistakably the smell of growing things. The children lean in the doorway, watching rivulets of meltwater run along the lane, pushing small twigs and bits of straw like boats on a narrow stream. Evenings, you hear a bird you have not heard in months, its call light and deliberate, as if testing whether the world is ready for song again. The sound makes you pause in your work, a smile tugging at the corners of your mouth. You know that soon there will be more voices in the dawn, weaving a chorus to wake the days. The food stores are still low, but now you count the days not in terms of how long until they run out, but how long until the first shoots of the kitchen garden push through. You have already set aside seeds, onions, cabbage, early greens ready to be planted in the soil once the frost has truly loosened its grip. Neighbors speak more often in the lanes now, lingering for a few minutes instead of hurrying past. There's a shared sense of relief, cautious but real, in each exchange. You can see it in the way shoulders stand a little straighter, in the way eyes glance toward the hills as if expecting to see green creeping down their slopes any day now. The animals seem to sense it too. The hens scratch more eagerly in their yard, finding the first tiny insects that dare the thaw. The cow's milk runs a little richer, as though she too feels the change in the air. Even the old dog, slow all winter, lies in the sunbeam by the door, turning his face toward the light with closed eyes. You begin to spend more time outside in the afternoons, mending the garden fence, clearing away the branches that broke under the winter's weight. The work is not yet planting, but it feels like the beginning of it. Each cleared space is a promise that something will grow there soon. At night, the cold still settles in, and you tend the fire as faithfully as ever. When you bank it for the night, you do so knowing that soon the nights will be shorter, and the need for such heavy burning will lessen. The pile of wood outside will last, now without worry. There is a shift in your own steps as well. The heaviness that winter places on every movement seems to lift just a little. You find yourself humming as you knead bread, lingering at the window to watch the snow melt running in silver threads through the yard. These are small changes, but they are as real as the buds on the trees. One morning, while fetching water, you see the first green blade push through a patch of bare earth near the fence. It is only a single sprout, thin as a thread, but it is enough to make you stop, crouch down, and look closely. You reach out and touch it gently, as if it might be startled by too much attention. In that moment, you feel the long months behind you loosening their hold. Spring has not fully arrived yet, you know there will still be cold days ahead, and perhaps another dusting of snow. But the signs are here, and they are multiplying. Each day brings some new proof that the world is turning toward warmth again. You carry this knowledge with you as you return to your work. Bread rises in its cloth, the stew simmers on the fire, and outside, the sun leans a little longer over the horizon before slipping away. Soon, the fields will be ready, the granary will fill again, and the long nights will be something to speak of, not to endure. The fire still burns by the time spring arrives in full. The snow has withdrawn from the fields, leaving the ground dark and ready for seed. The days are longer now, the air gentler, but the habits of winter remain in your hands. You still wake early to tend the hearth, though the fire burns lighter, no longer the heavy, hungry flame it once was. Outside, the lanes are soft with new mud, and the sound of water runs everywhere, in the ditches, down the hillsides, in the quickened river. The buds on the trees have opened into young leaves, trembling in the breeze. In the gardens, the first rows of greens are already pushing through, neat lines of life where just weeks ago there was only frost. Inside, the home feels different. The heavy blankets are folded and stored. The windows opened for the first time in months. The scent of fresh air mingles with the faint, familiar note of wood smoke, the smell of a winter survived. You move through the rooms with a lighter step, no longer counting every scrap of food, no longer glancing at the woodpile with calculation. Still, the memory of those cold months is not something you set aside entirely. You remember the mornings when the frost painted the inside of the windows, when the bread had to be sliced thin so it would last, when the fire was your only shield against the wind. You remember the neighbors who came to your door with a jar of broth or a loaf of bread, the nights spent in the hall sharing stories over a pot of stew. You keep those memories not as shadows, but as proof of what was endured, and of what was built in the enduring. The hearth was more than just a place for cooking. It was a promise that there would be warmth and light in the darkest weeks. And now, with the season turning, that promise still stands. The children, who once sat by the fire with blankets pulled up to their chins, now run barefoot across the yard, their laughter mixing with the songs of the birds. They no longer need the hearth's heat to warm their hands, but they still gather there in the evenings, drawn by habit as much as comfort. You watch them and know that the lessons of the winter patience, care, generosity have taken root as surely as the seeds in the garden. Neighbors pass your door more often now, on their way to the fields or the river. They stop to speak, their faces easier, their voices carrying a different weight. The talk is of planting and of plans for the coming months, not of how long the grain will last or whether the roof will hold another storm. And yet, beneath these new conversations runs the quiet understanding that next winter will come, as it always does, and that when it does, you will all be ready again. In the evenings, when the work is done, you still sit by the hearth. The fire is smaller, now, its glow softer, but it remains the heart of the home. You bank it lightly, not because you fear the cold, but because it feels right to keep it alive, a thread of continuity from the dark days to the bright. Sometimes you catch yourself staring into the flames, remembering the way they looked on the coldest nights, fierce, defiant, holding back the dark. You think of the countless small acts that kept that fire burning, the hands that split the wood, the careful feeding of the embers, the times you rose in the night to add another log. The fire's survival was never an accident, it was the result of steady, deliberate care. And so it is with the life of the family and of the village. It is kept not by grand gestures, but by the quiet work of many hands, each doing what they can, each watching over the others. The winter taught you this again, as it always does, and you carry that lesson forward into the warmth. When you finally close the shutters for the night, the last thing you see is the glow of the hearth, steady and sure. The fire still burns not as it did in the long, hard nights, but with the same spirit. It is a reminder that whatever the season, there is always a place for warmth, for light, and for the small, constant acts that keep both alive. When the next winter comes, as it surely will, you will tend it again.